Good evening. I'm Gracelyn Guyol, and welcome to my series on inspiring local nonprofits. This evening, I'm pleased to welcome Stuart Cole, president of the Stonington Land Trust. And I am particularly attached to preserving property in this area because when I was the Garden Club of America conservation leader for 21 clubs in Connecticut and Rhode Island, it became clear that the southern part of Connecticut, where it's densely populated and the land has become extremely expensive and valuable, it was almost impossible to acquire new properties to preserve for open space and to preserve special properties that have a unique value to the community. And so Stonington Land Trust is started to do that here in this area just in the nick of time, I think, because there's still plenty of properties available and financially they are within reach, although some are still very expensive. And so I think this is the right time. You're doing the right thing at the right time, Stuart, and I welcome and like to support what your efforts are.
Thank you.
Tell viewers a little bit about your background and how you became involved with Stonington Land Trust.
Okay, well, I grew up in Stonington. I was raised in Stonington in the countryside, and always been oriented towards the outdoors. Long story short, around 1990 or 90, it might have been 92, I was became a member of the Conservation Commission in Stonington, and which has oversight over open space set-asides from subdivisions.
Okay.
I'd already known a lot about the land around Stonington, and that led to eventually my experience on the Conservation Commission and my knowledge of also being a real estate broker for many years in Stonington. Led to me getting on the board of the Avalonia Land Conservancy. And then in 2007, I was asked to join the Stonington Land Trust, that's when it started.
That was when it was founded, the year it was founded.
Yeah.
And so talk about the founders and what's the primary mission of this particular entity?
Well, Stonington Land Trust concentrates on Stonington strictly, within the borders of the town of Stonington.
Unlike Avalonia.
Right. Stonington, so Avalonia is a large regional land trust reaching, spanning from Rhode Island into parts of New York and all the way up to Norwich.
They did a show on here too.
Yeah, and Stonington, a group decided, Jim and Lori Smith were instrumental in starting it, and there's a small neighborhood association called the Uplands Association. It's a homeowners association, and they, along with Stan Sim, who was also on the Conservation Commission and long experience in land preservation, decided to start a town focused land trust, and that was in 2007.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I'd like you to talk about the 6 properties that they've managed to preserve so far, but let's start with what I believe was their first one, was the Anguilla-Grande Preserve?
Yeah, the Anguilla, it started off just being known as the Anguilla Preserve. And that came from a preservation effort launched by the Conservation Commission, actually, in the 90s to preserve the groundwater protection, the aquifer under the Anguilla Brook.
Oh, okay. So there's a huge aquifer that serves...
It's a major aquifer in Stonington, second only to the Copse Brook, where the reservoir is now located.
Okay.
Stonington has not tapped into the Anguilla aquifer, but it was noted by then chairman of the Conservation Commission, Peter Thatcher, that it would be wise that the town started to protect some of that.
Yes,
for
because if the
possible
town
future.
continues to grow,
Right.
you will need more water.
So the Anguilla Preserve went to the town, and it's been the feeling of a lot of people that town open space held by municipalities is vulnerable in many
okay.
times, because administrations change, feelings changed. You know, this has happened around this area. The town of Groton had an argument about somebody left some open space to the town, and then years later it became, well, what does open space mean? You know, can it then be turned into a little league field or a golf course, or, you know, in some instances the town has stored its open space. Maybe they put snow plows on it in the summer or something like
Stored-
that. You know? Yeah.
Stored furniture there.
Yeah, it's still open
Equipment.
space, but
Yes.
you end up, so it's been the feeling, it was a feeling of the Conservation Commission and many others that it would be safer to have an entity dedicated towards preservation and perpetuity of open space,
Okay.
to hold such land as particularly over an aquifer protection zone.
Very important.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's how that came into being. That was our first piece.
And how big is that? Roughly?
That is 33 acres.
Okay.
Yeah,
And so the
33
town
acres.
gave that to the Stonington Land Trust to
Yes.
protect it into the future.
Yeah, it was already protected, but it was felt that
More
a
secure.
land trust would be better able. I think Stonington generally feels that land, open space preservation is better done by a land trust.
Right. Okay.
So.
And then the next property was a large one. But
Well,
it
let
was
me just add
oh,
one
you're still
other
going.
thing.
Okay.
The Grand Preserve was added on. That was 18 acres, and that's south of the Anguilla, and they now connect.
I was going to say that connect.
Yeah,
So that
yeah.
gives you the advantage for wildlife of having two
Right.
continuous
And
properties.
so this is all contiguous to the Pawcatuck Little League field, so that you already have a nice open space up there that is bordering the stream up there, and a lot of wetlands. So it was a smart purchase.
So
smart
it's
acquisition.
a nice piece of open space now
Yeah,
that's much
yeah,
three
yeah.
times.
We do not really have trails on it yet, per se, but it does front on North.
Okay. Well, you're still a young organization. You haven't
Right.
had time to develop all of these.
Yeah, so it's
For public
obviously when you
access.
have wetlands, it's difficult to put trails in that are without a lot of work, and sometimes they infringe on wetlands too much. So
Right. So some of the properties may not have trails for the public,
correct. Some may
but
not.
some will.
Yeah, the public can still go on them if they're, if they front on a public road, they can still go on them, but there may not be a trail.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So then the next property was the Fusina Conservation Easement. And tell viewers what's the difference between a preserve and a conservation easement.
Okay, so the Fusina family owns a large landholding up on Pequot Trail. The difference with a conservation easement, it's described in real estate law as when you own a piece of property, in theory, you own from the center of the earth up to the heavens.
Okay.
So you have various rights, and then the number is undefined. But for instance, you have out west, you frequently read about water rights, mineral rights, possibly farming rights, timber rights. In New York City, you often read about air rights. Penn Station was a famous property where they sold the air rights over the station.
Okay.
Yeah, they tore down the original station, and then it became what was, for one point, the Pan Am building, and that was all built on air rights.
Okay.
So if you imagine a bundle of rights And one of them is development rights. And you can sell off one of those rights, just as you can sell off the mineral rights to a property. So you can sell off the development rights, and if that is, or donate it, and if that is held by a conservation-minded organization, obviously they hold it to
Prevent development.
prevent development.
Okay.
They hold that
All right.
out of the land.
And the Fusina property is sizable in terms of the
Yes.
what's been
Yes.
conserved.
Yes, it had meadow and forest on it, and
Has a pond?
a pond. It has, it slopes down from the highlands on Pequot Trail down towards sort of the police station area on Route 1. Covers quite a bit of
It's
land.
a beautiful property. Garden club members were there, and we
Yeah.
were planting trees around the pond one year.
Yes.
And it
Yes.
was a very desirable piece of property, and it's wonderful to have that preserved.
Right, so I can also add that conservation easements are not open to the public. They are the entity that holds the development rights, or also known as, same thing as conservation easement, inspects the property once a year to make sure that the owner is not infringing, not doing any developing in this case.
Okay, so
Right.
once they get the easement, the conservation easement, does that give them some tax advantages too?
Yes, because they've peeled off a very important part of your bundle of rights.
Okay,
So normally, if you completely own your property, you can do all sorts of things with it within the zoning laws. And so once you've removed that, your property is valued at considerably less money.
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so for viewers who have property that's valuable and that they don't want to see developed, it would be in their best interest economically to put it into a conservation easement to help preserve it
Yeah.
for the future, and it gives them the tax break of doing so.
A lower
from
assessment.
Lower
Yeah,
assessments.
a lower assessment.
Okay.
Now, you can define a conservation easement in many different ways. Some conservation easements allow, for instance, timbering, allow farming. They
Okay.
might even, depending how you write it, they might even allow a golf course. They might allow certain structures. It's all how you define it.
Okay.
So it's defined, there's no set conservation easement per se. But in general, when a land trust takes one, then it'll be that there's no development, and possibly, if it's a forest, maybe timber stand improvement, but probably no cutting.
But by improvement, you mean selected cutting for
Yes.
keeping it a healthy forest and not
Right,
overgrown?
right. Typically around here, as you know, we have many what are called invasive species.
Yes, we do.
Which are-
Non-native,
Yeah.
very invasive.
Bittersweet, Russian olive, et cetera, that
Right.
if you want the forest to progress into a mature forest, what we consider a beautiful forest, then there's work to be
You
done
have to cut
get
that
it
stuff
there.
out and
Yeah,
keep it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would be one type of improvement that we
Okay.
would do. Yeah.
Well, and I know that those kinds of, when you embark on protecting those kinds of properties that need that kind of maintenance, then you also run up the cost to the organization that's holding and managing it. So that's
Yeah.
another consideration for the Stonington Land Trust is to,
Yeah, conservation easements can sometimes be a problem when properties are sold. There's been some fairly large cases in Connecticut where a succeeding landowner didn't really understand the conservation easement and proceeded to do other things on the property, like expand his lawn or put in a tennis court or something. And then that got into a legal case.
Okay, so-
it is something that a land trust has to keep strict watch on.
Well, and also when an owner who gave the easement sells the property, the buyer needs to be informed about
Yeah, very much.
the restrictions on it.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so is there anything else you want to talk about in the conservation easement area?
Not at this point.
Okay,
No, I
then
think we're
let's
good.
move to where is Grandview Preserve and what makes it so special?
Grandview Preserve is sort of a classic subdivision with a 15% set aside, which is the rules in the zoning laws in Stonington.
Okay, so if you make a development,
Yeah, if you have a subdivision of over a certain amount of lots, which is generally more than 2 or 3, you will have to set aside 15% land to be dedicated towards open space.
oh, okay.
And that land cannot, it has to be a certain amount, it can be some wetland, but it also has to have some non-wetlands in it.
Okay, so
so-
people can't just make it all wetlands
Right,
where
they
nobody
can't
could-
just give the land away
That's not any good
is
to build
totally
on.
unbuildable.
Okay,
So what this was, the Grandview is a housing development up on, I believe the road is called Grandview, and it's off of Elm Ridge. And it was a new housing development that was done over time, starting in, well, probably one of the slow periods, like 2006, 2008.
I've been on that road.
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
seen that development.
And what it was a large farm field, but then it also had a Christmas tree plantation. So a lot of what the land trust got was the Christmas tree plantation in back, and they designed the houses to look out over this preserve, which is really the optimal way to do it now.
Good planning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's good planning because instead of having land that the homeowners don't really relate to, it's really their view. So,
So they are
yeah,
concerned about it.
yeah. So it enhances them to have a land trust next to them.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, then tell us about the Thomas Minor Nature and Wildlife Preserve. Now, this would be a different kind of a preserve, correct?
Yeah, that was that is a. It was named a preserve as it's 82 acres
Okay.
on Togwonk Road, and it actually came from, many people will remember the Pfizer, what was considered the Pfizer farm, or the Pfizer experimental farm, where Pfizer Pharmaceutical used their, tried out their mycelium and so forth.
Yes, byproducts of
Yeah.
Manufacturing
Right.
vitamin C, I think,
And antibiotics.
and
Right.
antibiotics were dumped there or tested there for fertilizer
Yes.
purposes.
Yeah.
And then they also grew corn and
Yeah.
rotated crops on
Yes.
that
Yes.
property. It's 60 acres, correct?
Yeah, yeah. So the land trust entered a deal with them. There were some problems with long-term use of some of the byproducts that were leaving traces of toxicity
In the soil,
in the soil.
but not in the water.
No, they did extensive tests to monitor. It's a fairly high up ridge on one side it is the Stony Brook watershed, and on the other side is the Anguilla watershed, quite a
Right.
ways away.
Yes.
So, but on the bulk of it is a fairly flat field, and I'd say about 50 acres is about 50 acres is field, so it's pretty big, and we decided to have it a preserve because we had the opportunity to have a study done of the New England cottontail, and
okay.
then we also brought in some bird studies. So it's been very good in that way because of its mixed field and forest
And it has some
habitat.
evergreens on it too.
It does.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so-
Yeah. And also had at one point it had a elm, a experimental elm tree plot at the front south end, which was growing blight-resistant elms. We have not continued that, and they were moved out. I guess that study finished, but that was done in concert with Pfizer. So it's had a long history of work on it of various types, and it seemed to be, the opportunity came up.
Well, and it was a good opportunity because it was
Yeah.
good for both parties.
Yeah.
Pfizer was paying a lot to hold on to it and not really using it.
Right, and it had the potential problems of that would be a greater liability if they sold to a
Developer.
residence or
Yeah.
a business.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the Meadow Woods Preserve. What makes this important?
The Meadow Woods is.
And where is it?
It's down off Greenhaven Road.
Okay.
Yeah, Greenhaven and River Road, actually, coming north from Osbrook Point, east of the Pawcatuck River. Meadow Woods is unique in that it has about 6-7 acres of farming on it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
and we it has trails, but it also is farm. So it's mixed use.
Mixed use.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that's the type of thing we really like to see.
And with the farming, will the trails have access to the public?
Yeah, the trails are, you can, from I believe it's Meadow Lane, there's a sign at the end of that where you can access
The
yeah,
trails.
yeah.
Okay.
It's used by the neighborhood, and the new condominium, which is off of Mary Hall Road, I think.
Okay. So
Yeah.
joggers, neighborhood walkers.
Yeah. Yep.
Good.
Absolutely.
Well, that's
yeah.
the perfect use for open
yeah.
space.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so then we come to Gilbert Preserve.
Well, Gilbert Preserve is down on Osbrook Point, and we're working on some other properties down there, but the Gilbert family decided that they had an opportunity to deed off a lot. And families do this for various reasons, but obviously when you donate land to a land trust, well then that's like a fairly large donation to any charitable group or
Right.
nonprofit.
Right.
And they decided the family wanted to make sure this was preserved in perpetuity. They had no interest in owning the land anymore as in a conservation easement, and they decided that this would be the best thing to do.
The best use.
And because of our work down there on another property to the north, which will hopefully come to fruition, it's a great asset to have down there. Yeah.
And how many acres is the Gilbert Preserve roughly?
The Gilbert Preserve is only, it's small, about 3 acres, I think. Yeah,
Okay.
3.19. Yeah.
But if you adjoin that to another acreage to it, it helps.
Well, particularly if what we end up with down there is only a conservation easement, while then having land that is owned in fee in total, that's a great thing.
Okay.
To
All
have,
right.
because then you can actually have people down there, you can have a gathering down there, and this is the land trust land, which is great.
Right.
That's
right.
what you want.
And does the Gilbert Preserve, is it along a river or a stream or
No,
a brook or anything?
it's interior to. It's not far from the Pawcatuck River, and it's close to the Osbrook Point Road.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's
Yeah.
been in the Gilbert family for a lot of years.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have about 5 minutes left, so talk a little bit about where, if you can, where Stonington Land Trust is headed or what you're looking for, and then how viewers can support what you're doing or join you.
Well, you can find us at stoningtonlandtrust.org,
Okay.
And we're continuing on in finding valuable pieces of land in terms of ecologically valuable in Stonington. Obviously, Stonington is somewhat finite because we're only in Stonington.
Right.
But we don't see any end to right now
But
to the
there's a
work
lot
to be
of-
done.
There's a lot of really valuable, environmentally valuable land because we're so close to the coast in so many places.
There's that, and there is also a surprising amount of land which is farmed. And
Still.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And we would like to work to preserve some of that. You know, we recognize that there's a large movement in Eastern Connecticut for locally sourced foods. And so we're excited about doing some work there too.
Helping to preserve the farmer's ability to farm.
Sure.
Yes.
Sure. And so
Requires land.
Yeah, in the northern half of Stonington there's a fair amount of farmland that in open space that we'd like to help preserve, as well as forest land. So yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
And so, what kind of support, all the different kinds of support, do you use and need?
We always need monetary support. Most properties, but many property have been donated. But Stonington Land Trust has also done some fairly large dollar acquisitions, which is somewhat unusual for a small land trust. But I think that the feeling is there in Stonington that it was a good time to acquire
It
and
is.
get land.
Still.
And people feel strongly about it.
Yes, okay.
So, you know.
So they can, do you do a funding drive or
We have.
to get cash in to help you maintain these lands
We
once
have.
they're acquired?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Land trusts usually work with specific funding drives for a parcel, but also work with your funding for your operating.
Yeah, operating
For instance,
expenses.
Stonington being a small land trust, but we still have an executive director, which is a paid position. It's a professional position, mainly because some of the properties we've gotten we've gotten grants to get them, and
Okay.
that's a tremendous amount of work. And you
It
need
is.
somebody who knows their way around and is attentive to the whole application process.
And to
ongoing.
detail.
Yeah.
Lots of detail.
Yeah, it's difficult, and you have to work your way through the various bureaucracies. We have one coming, we hope, from a federal entity, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot
It
of
is,
work.
and it's a lot of work to, once you get the grant, to manage it. And, to manage the grant. So
Yeah.
you do need a professional.
So that's why we have an executive director, and that's gone well. But
Good.
that's a paid position, so
Okay.
we have to fund that every year.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I know that by the time this airs, you will have just had your annual meeting.
Yes.
But are those always in June?
Yes.
Okay, and if people want to get on your mailing list to get information from you, they just go to your website?
Yeah, go StoningtonLandTrust.org and drop a line to us, and you'll be on our mailing list. Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Great. Anything else you'd like to say? We have about 30 seconds left.
No, I think we've done a good job covering it.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for the work that you're doing, Stuart, and thank the Smiths because they started this, and it's a wonderful thing for the community of Stonington and for all of us. And so thank you for joining us this evening, and I hope that you've enjoyed this series. This is the final show of 12 in my series this year of inspiring local nonprofits and helping raise their awareness amongst the community. Good night.